Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 10 minutes now with Jay Bonci, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. For his 1 year anniversary, he's going to share with us his successes and the struggles he's facing. So this is going to be very interesting. And if you have questions for Jay, please make sure to start asking the questions because we got so many questions from social media. Start with a Q so we know this is for a question, and put it into the comment section below. Also, if you want to share you here with us today, please put your name in the comment section so we can highlight you on the screen as well. Stay tuned for another 10 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes today with Jay Bonci, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. It's going to be a very interesting episode for his 1 year anniversary to look at the successes, the struggles, and what he's been working on for the last year. So stay tuned. If you have questions for Jay, make sure you start asking the questions now because we have a lot of questions already from social media. So start with a Q in the comment section below so we know it's a question. And if you want to share you here with us today, just put your name in the comment section and we'll be able to highlight you on the screen. Stay tuned for another 5 minutes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're pretty lucky today to have Jay Bonci back on the show, the Air Force and Space Force Chief Technology Officer. He's been in the job now for a little over a year, so he's coming back to share with us his thoughts, and it's going to be a very interesting discussions. What he's learned, what successes has he been able to achieve, and the struggle he's facing in this job, which is obviously one of the most difficult role in the Air Force and Space Force. So this is going to be a great episode. If you have not yet subscribed to the show, please make sure you do that by registering to inthenickofTime.tv so you can get notifications about our next videos. We're definitely being throttled on LinkedIn way more than usual. Our usual newsletter that's getting usually 15,000 views. We only got 1,500 this time, so that's interesting. So try to directly register so you get a direct email for the next videos and episodes. We usually only send one email a week, so you're not getting spammed by us at all. So try to do that. Also, wanted to remind everybody, if you've not checked it out yet, Learn with Nick is here with 50% off for military, civilians, and veterans, and also 20% off for the first 3,000 adopters now. Let's beat China. So check it out. We release a video every week, and you'll see this week we published, if you missed it, a video on test-driven development, TDD. So if you have not had the chance to check it out, go on the link on learnwithnick.com /catalog. You're going to be able to see all the videos, but you can directly see that TDD video there and check it out if you want to learn how to write tests before you even write code and what are the benefits of doing that. It's definitely a pretty unique value proposition for development teams. So check that out if you have not yet had the chance to see it. So go directly on learnwithnick.com. Now, when it comes to um, what we're working on, also wanted to share that we're going to be launching probably in a couple of weeks now a new world, the Cloud Native Town, which is a world's first cloud native metaverse community where we have all the content we're going to publish, but also CNCF companies are going to be able to release their announcements and have events and keynotes. And we're going to have a lot of great content and community to engage in learning. So you're going to find different rooms with different topics, different engagements, different games as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We are still looking for a couple of ambassadors to help us make sure that people behave on the platform. So if you want to join us, let us know directly on LinkedIn. And we also want to have all the CNCF related companies to publish their video on the platform for free. So if you know CNCF companies have not talked to us yet, send them to us so we can put their videos on the platform. And we're going to be covering pretty much every aspect of DevSecOps, cybersecurity, and digital transformation as a whole, and even some acquisition content as well. So it's going to be a lot of great information on there, and you're going to be able to go into different rooms and engage with people there that have a similar interest and different backgrounds, and gives you a little bit of diversity of opinions to discuss and engage with the rest of companies and what people are working on in the same space. So it's going to be, I think, pretty interesting. So stay tuned for the launch. But in the meantime, if you want to make sure the content gets there, just reach out to us directly. Now, when it comes to today, if you don't know Jay was already one of the first guests on the show a year ago. And now Jay Bonci has been the Air Force and Space Force CTO for over a year. So he's coming back for his 1 year anniversary. Of course, as you can see, his responsibilities are pretty vast, and he's going to be able to talk to us today about his successes and challenges and struggles. And he's really in charge of a pretty wide IT enterprise portfolio to obviously drive the adoption and resilience, and even kind of design the strategic technical vision of the entire enterprise IT of the DAF. Before that, he was the senior director of public sector engineering at ICAM in Cambridge, where he led a team of 60 engineers to bring the ICAM public sector portfolio to life. And he's done a great job there as well. He helped create the DoD global content delivery service program that is still powering and securing over 2,000 capabilities by providing a pretty amazing proxy capability. And in his 14-year tenure, he had many roles in the public sector, including engineering management and as an individual contributor in system engineering and web applications. Before Akama, he was involved in the open source community as an engineer at VA Linux and a contributor to the Debian Linux distribution. Many people don't know that. And he worked as an independent security researcher and is a contributor to the DoD vulnerability disclosure program. And if it wasn't enough, he's also an Eagle Scout. So let's bring Jay on the show now. Welcome, Jay. Good to have you.
Hey, great to be back.
Yeah, so exciting. And, it's been a year already. Time flies when you're in a pretty difficult role. So I maybe sometimes it's slow and sometimes it's fast at the same time. I find it pretty interesting when I remember those days, kind of how it felt painful, right? When you're, doing the work, but at the same time, you look back and you realize it's been a year. But the first thing we always ask people is, to share a little bit about their background. People know you, but I still think it kind of makes sense for people that don't know you yet to learn a little bit about you. So if you want to just give us a rundown of your background and what you've been able to achieve so far.
Sure. So my background is I'm a technologist. I went to school for computer science and later for data. I've been interested in security topics for a long time. I kind of grew up in the open source community. Really, some of my first real technical interactions were working on Debian and working on a variety of open source projects. And I did the source code. I did the Subversion source code deployment for SourceForge back in the day, which was like at the time, it was like one of the largest Subversion, really one of the largest code hosting repositories in the world before, kind of the Git revolution. And so have seen the community of software development grow up. I've seen technology grow up. And now I would say that my background and my experience is in scale. It's in getting organizations to scale. It's in getting technology to scale. And it's going from that world where you have an idea, you've got a product market fit, you understand what that needs to be, and then sort of generalizing it and being able to do that 1,000 times, tens of thousands of times, and to figure out, what is the organization that needs to be able to do that. And that's the place where we kind of find ourselves really in the Air Force. Is like we have our hands around what we need to do, right? I mean, I don't even think there's broad disagreement over it. It's a matter of how do we do that in hundreds of locations, and how do we move to this disaggregated, federated concept of operations? And so these are all scaling problems, right? They're all people scaling problems, they're all tech scaling problems. And so this job was really appealing because it is like kind of that ultimate set of scaling problems, kind of in the public interest. And that's probably what I'm going to be doing, probably for the rest of my career, kind of solving scaling challenges as we continue to tackle sort of bigger and bigger and kind of snarlier problem sets. And so I find myself constantly intrigued by people structures and by the choices that people make when they're in certain types of people structures, and how agile works as an information flow that allows people to make good decisions, and how do you really empower, the challenge of the CIO's office is how do you empower, tens of thousands of independent actors to make decisions that tend towards good outcomes, right? And how do you create the environment for distributed execution towards a broad goal? And we're moving broadly in a military and government sense about what does a disaggregated view of command and control look like? What does a disaggregated view of execution look like? It's started in the special forces world and is kind of sweeping across the military. So our IT systems and our, IT is going to underlie that. IT is the digital fabric that's going to make disaggregated operations and disaggregated execution of whatever the mission set is across the world possible. And so we have to be ahead of that to kind of lay that foundation. And so that's the stuff that like I think a ton about, right? Is how, how do we go from a technologist perspective, right? Like a nerd who is, spends his weekends learning more about React and JavaScript frameworks and, and playing with things and tinkering with things and constantly learning. And then you kind of take that nerd hat off and you put this sort of organizational leadership hat on top of it and say, okay, how would I set up so that, kind of fellow nerds would make the right choices and less technical commanders know what they're supposed to be doing. And, how do we master an increasingly complex technical baseline so that we get the right outcomes for people. And that's like, I think that is the core challenge of what I would say is broadly the CIO's office in really every CIO office across the country, especially in something where we inherit this very rigid structure from the government and then an even more rigid structure inside of the military. And so that's when I look at my personal narrative, my personal journey, you think like, okay, this is really like, this is where I need to be for myself to grow. Right. And so it's, I'm excited to be here. I'm still thrilled to be in this position and still thrilled to be learning.
It's interesting. You said a lot of pretty interesting things here. First, you couldn't obviously find a bigger organization than the DoD, so you're pretty good at the right place, right? For scale, right? I don't think there's a competition anywhere else, pretty much. So that's already a check, right? Now, you talked about learning, right? And it's interesting because I found myself struggling, with the workload and keeping up with what I used to be able to do before the job. Which is really, spend quite a bit of time on learning. Do you find yourself able to still do what you said on the weekends and like? I'm
able.
What's going on?
A couple of weekends a month, I'm able to put maybe 8 to 10 hours in, kind of learning something, whether or not it's some new cloud thing or playing with something like SageMaker or some machine learning, some JavaScript frameworks, something about mobile platforms, right? Enough so that you understand the essence of how it works and you understand the arc of where that technology is going, right? And to understand whether or not these technologies are iterative, right? Or whether or not they're like truly revolutionary, right? Like containers are not an iterative technology. They are a revolutionary technology, right? And you have to really like play with them and get your hands dirty to be like, oh, I understand why, right? I understand why workload decomposition into this pattern is difficult, but why it's necessary, right? And why it's a part of scaling. It's for me personally, like I've always had to generate an intuitive understanding, an intuitive model of those technology concepts to be able to then explain it in different ways, to be able to form new metaphors, right? And instead of, because what I don't want to do as a technology leader is I don't want to say the same rote stuff. I don't want to be like digital transformation is important, right? But that doesn't mean anything without something underneath that, or without like a foundational understanding of what that actually is. It doesn't get you anything, right? And so it's constantly like iterating over that mental model so that I learned stuff, just dive into media, dive into tech sources. Like I spend probably like an hour or so a day in just various podcasts listening, just trying to learn. So it's, I keep trying to take in new information because the government can, to your point, the government can make you go stale really fast, right? There are, I went on vacation with my family recently. We went on a cruise. And so this is an isolated sampling of like 3,000 people and 2 people that work for the Air Force, right? So it's easy to feel like you're in a bubble, right? It's easy to understand that, to understand that there are millions of people you interact with and you never have to find somebody outside of your organization. But you have to keep pressing forward your own understanding, and you can't get comfortable. Like you can't ever lose that dissatisfaction with not knowing, and that's really hard, right? It's an uphill there are lots and lots and lots of social reasons why that's an uphill fight. But you just have to do it. And, obviously I'm not perfect in it. There's some weekends where it's just terrible TV and relaxing and hanging out with my kids, right? But otherwise, just have to keep reinvesting.
And the other thing you mentioned, is the kind of the size of the department and the number of people that have to make the right decisions. Often because we have a lot of silos and a lot of decisions are decentralized. Do you actually, I had a great discussion actually this week with the Defense Business Board or whatever the name is, and they are working on a report, right, for DevSecDef on enterprise IT and recommendations they would want to make. And God knows I had quite a few of them. But I guess when you take a look at the nature of the decentralization of the department, I kind of argue that you probably cannot succeed at training and educating everybody. So at some point, some things need to be centralized. What's your take on the ability to centralize some of that stuff, some of the basics of IT, enterprise IT capabilities, so you can then let those teams focus on the more complex problems?
So there is a give and take between centralization and localization, and to be able to make that decision, this is a huge topic of thought and discussion over the last year. Largely because we sit in the CIO shop, right? And the natural instinct of the CIO shop is like centralize everything. Right? Is that we're going to provide one service, and the incentives are there, right? So we're told from our budgetary stakeholders, like, save money, you're spending a ton on IT, get good IT spend, we're going to audit IT spend, we're going to make sure that we, whatever phrase you want to use, waste, fraud, and abuse, like there's 100 different ways of saying this, but people get the sense that people lack an understanding of just how expensive IT is, because IT is everything, right? IT is more of operations now than it has ever been, right? And so the cost is naturally going to go up, and there's something you do to stop that. And so we have to ask the question under those pressures, like, when do you centralize something, right? And you have to understand what that distributed model is and what the decision space that you are going to delegate down. And you have to think very, 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 very precisely about the types of outcomes that you want. And so, for instance, instead of thinking about a service that you have to get people into, you want to think about what are the vignettes, right, that are downstream, and let people choose a vignette that makes sense for their mission set. Like you don't want to overly constrain choice. You don't want to say you must do this one thing, but you want to say, okay, there are probably about 5 acceptable choices here, and we want to get people thinking around the constraints of one of these 5 things, because constraints paradoxically drive a ton of innovation, right? When you force a team, you either constrain their time, their budget, their materials. People come with all kinds of crazy solutions, right? You delegate to the floor. You figure out, like, hey, we just don't need to do this thing. This thing isn't valuable, right? Like, people can naturally optimize for value in constrained systems. And so when you think about, but if they're overly constrained, then you just tire people out, right? There's no flexibility there. So it's a matter of having the right loose constraints at the top. You kind of think of it as like a cone of decision making, right? You want to make sure that you hand over that centralization at the right place, and that allows people downstream to make those decisions, right? So, for instance, like you would, when you think about zero trust, you're going to think about several different types of app patterns, right? You're not going to say, you can't say, okay, we're going to move everybody to Kubernetes. It's not the right choice, right? You can't, but you also can't say, okay, we're going to move everybody over to, like a network-based segmentation, right? Because that doesn't quite get you there for SaaS implementations. So you have to think about, okay, there's probably 3 or 4, 5 different models, and you want to enshrine that in your service catalog, right? That's like the first step. And then the second step when you get to centralization is to think, and this is a part of a larger notion of digital transformation in large organizations. It is, how do you reduce the transaction cost inside of the organization? Because commercial natively thinks that way. If you can't buy a product, you aren't going to buy it, right? Or if it's a pain in the ass to buy a product. And services or really any type of service that you receive inside the government often has an absurdly high transaction cost, right? You have to sign a PDF, you've got to MIPR money over, you've got to do all of these things. And we have to look more and more at the outcomes and the transaction costs it gets there, because those are the key barriers internally where unless we are placing leadership attention in them, the financial incentives don't, the social incentives are there to not go with high cost internal systems. But the monetary incentives don't matter, right? Because you're essentially running a monopoly, and you're going to leak. People call it shadow IT, right? But you're going to leak outcomes out the side if you don't have the right constraints. And so, trying to figure out how you balance, you constrain a number of choices, but they're still choices, and then how you reduce that transaction cost is how you get good centralized services. And you have to keep iterating over that. You have to constantly say, okay, we want you to be in production in a day, right? We want you to be, press a button, put your credit card down, your government pay card, or your member or whatever, and then you're up and running in a day, right? Like you want to keep iterating over those processes. You can, like you need a piece of software to do your job, right? You go to the software portal, you say, I need this, right? An email shoots up to your supervisor, say, yep, that's fine. We're willing to spend the money on that. Gets installed that afternoon, right? We need that type of reduced transaction costs. And commercial companies have this all day long because they have the pressure for time and the pressure for speed. And we have to stay hungry on that stuff. And that's how we're going to drive better outcomes, because it's going to, we're just going to save so much time and money on just humans spinning their wheels and other things. So that's what we have to look at when we start to drive strategic intent for the Air Force and how we can drive strategic outcomes. It's you can't just say like just use Cloud One, right? Like that works at this very surface level, and it makes sense. It's seductive in a lot of ways because it makes sense from a technology perspective, right? But then you have to ask like, okay, what are the next couple of levels for how do you need to be specific, right? How do we get people into the right choices for Cloud One? How do we help get a path for applications that probably don't have a path for cloud, right? Like what are the other things in the environment that cause people not to go to cloud? Because we know cloud is important for resilience and agility. So, and we want those outcomes. So how do we encourage people to get there? And so there's all sorts of things about understanding the true value stream inside of government service delivery that takes so many layers you have to get through. And it's very easy to be satisfied with very surface level answers to these problems because it's big and it's hard to understand. And there are like literally 1 million people here, right? It's hard to say, how do you, it's hard to say like, people just buy whatever, right? Like it's easy to say that. But you realize people just buy whatever because they don't have the right information or they don't have the right budgets or, they couldn't budget for computers. So they're using end of the year dollars and they're doing the best that they can, right? There's some logical set of non-malfeasance decisions that typically cause those outcomes at scale. And without reducing the inputs into those decisions, you're not going to change the decisions. And so you have to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and dig to get to the bottom of it. And one of the things I've learned in this job is you have to dig way more than you thought you did. Right. It's very easy, especially as an executive where you're like staring on top of Olympus and there are, 3,000-4,000 problems in front of you and any one of them are want for your attention. And so you don't want to dig too far into one of them. But a lot of times it just involves being dissatisfied with an answer until you get something that makes sense and to continue to evolve that model of why those outcomes are the way that they are. And it challenges you as an executive to keep reevaluating what you understand about the environment. Because it's so easy in the Pentagon, at leadership at a 2-leader level to be in a bubble, right? And to get to that core source of information about what's actually going on, not because people are lying to you, but because that information is not clear. Like it's hard to get to the truth to make a good decision on. And so, as we say, like, what's it going to take to centralize a service? What's it going to take to develop a thing that everybody needs, right? In the business world, you have business cases and you have studies and you can turn that crank really, really quickly. And in the DoD, that is often tied to the POM cycle, and it takes a couple of years. And by then, the people who started the idea, maybe they've left the organization and gone to other organizations, right? And you kind of the ship loses its captain mid sail. So there are lots and lots of things to change around that, and the core principles of just agility and resilience and increasingly driving understanding of your environment are the only ways that we're going to get to a better execution environment.
Yeah, so you made a lot of great points there, right? Giving options for any enterprise service is key, right? You want to have diversity of options. I think a good example is, when we started Platform One, we had kind of the open source free model. We had the, hey, contribute your container model. We had the SaaS kind of full PaaS model. And then of course we had, 5 Kubernetes distributions options people could pick, right? So people had options, still opinionated options to some degree. Everything is somewhat opinionated. Cloud One is kind of the same, right? They had very opinionated models. Then we opened up a little bit that, right? Gave a little bit more options. A little bit more DevSecOps options too, right? Added more cloud providers and different, capabilities. So I guess, you can centralize enterprise IT in program offices and have them provide the options and let the customer, who is, the warfighter, pick from these options without having to completely make each of those customers truly understand the, A to Z process, right?
The flip side to those decisions, right, is to figure out what is the true value of centralization, right? And in like a Cloud One example, there are lots of values of centralization, right? So first of which is you have a consistent concept of operations, right? So if you're an Azure app, you kind of all work the same way. If you're an AWS, you kind of all work the same way. Or if you're Platform One, you have a similar pipeline, regardless of your end Kubernetes distribution, whether or not you're running on EKS or you're running on Rancher, or maybe you're using the Azure DevOps pipeline to get there, right? Like there are pieces and parts that you can change out that give you that choice that you think is probably right for your environment, but the outcome is still the same. And so we often ask, like, what's the value of centralization, right? And there are lots of values that can drive. Some of it is cost, right? So for instance, if we all just are in the same AWS tenant, we can get very aggressive spend plans and very aggressive pricing. Same with Microsoft, right? It's not we're just picking a vendor here. And you have similar ATOing structures. You have, one centralized monitoring plane because you're pre-integrated with the monitoring and account management.
Same type of stack.
Same type of stack. That's exactly right. And there are certain things like you wouldn't want disaggregated email solutions, right? Because the value of it being all together is greater than the value you're going to derive from choice. And you have to look at each service through that lens, is to say, right, what is the value of choice? What is the value of customization? And for instance,
you're saying some services should have only one option.
That's right. Right. So email's a really good choice, right? Like I don't want different people on different email tenants. We want to be able to sync calendars.
Yeah, we let them do that.
We let them do it in certain circumstances, right?
The CIO has given waivers, right, for G Suite use across many.
Yeah, there are a few G Suite users, but those are because we don't have good services in other areas.
By the way, the G Suite teams are not even on the same tenant, right? They're on
their own tenant, right? And actually, so G Suite's one of those things that we're looking at about, what's it going to take to, as we kind of do more road mapping efforts, like very specifically, is there a reason to have an alternate option there? Right, to say like, okay, like maybe
only if you fail at providing the service in the first place.
Well, maybe not, right? So for instance, G Suite's a very interesting example, right? So if you are AFRL and you have a lot of collaboration with industries that do not have DoD relationships, right? You're not talking about like APL or something like that, like true academic collaboration. Then it's a lot harder, right? It's really hard to share documents inside of DoD SharePoint because Cybercom places those restrictions. And so
we made those we created that problem.
Right. Understood. Right. But people above us created that problem.
My company, I have no problem sharing with the world any document, right? So we created that problem.
So Cybercom, that's right. Cybercom did create that problem.
Have the same issue with G Suite. I mean, if G Suite consumption would grow, Cybercommand the next day would start requiring the same, limitations, right? I mean, it's just they're getting away with it because it's not
right. They're flying under the radar. That's right? Exactly it. And right? So the question, that's the value question that you get to, right?
I mean, the product is at fault. The DoD is the DoD created those constraints, right? It wasn't
100%, right?
Okay.
But the DoD created those
constraints. The reason why I'm saying that is we keep blaming Microsoft, right? But
no, it's not.
The DoD made that mistake, right?
No, it's not a
I
Microsoft
know
problem
you're
at all.
not, but people are, right?
People
People
do,
say,
right?
well, people need to realize this is
Cybercom
not a
placed a bunch of
Microsoft
policy
problem.
on us, right?
Right, yeah,
Cybercom says
exactly.
you must run your tenant this way. And so I understand why.
Right.
But because for every Cybercom regulation, there's a bad thing that happened ahead of time. And so, you just dove right into the middle of that conversation, which is like, is there a use case, right? Is the use case, is the right thing to advocate for Cyber Command to create these tenant sharing or these other bubbles for collaboration with academia or collaboration with trusted DIB partners, for instance? Or is the right thing to do to have a separate, like almost like a DMZ space where we keep the protected CUI information and then we just do like research with those folks, right? And
that sounds like perimeter security all over again.
It is a little bit, certainly, right? Because the regime thinks about O365 in a perimeter way. And so,
but what else than email would you say? I have my list. I like to compare it with yours, but I gave actually a list to the team for the report on what I think should be centralized. There's more than just email. What else is there?
So I mean, there's
That should
certain
be
things that have like that have technical reasons for centralization, like a lot of your PKI obviously is like centralized.
Yeah.
There's certain things, you have to have, obviously you have to like have a centralized root server, but you could have disaggregated DNS. That's
Sure.
meant for disaggregated world. You
What
probably
about identity management?
You want centralized identity management. You hard want centralized identity management, right? But that is like this offshoot of PKI, right? Because you want to have cryptographic trust around identity management so that you can you've got good assurance over the life cycle of each of your user objects and that kind of thing. So you want centralized, and you also want a relatively constrained set of services around how you do zero trust segmentation. But you don't want centralized, you don't want centralized, for instance, like centralized transport is probably not necessary. That's probably a bad idea because you're going to push a human scaling constraint. You probably don't want, you want centralized application patterns, but not app providers, right? Like, so
what about
the goal
the policy
here
enforcement point
is, I'm sorry, policy enforcement
point? What about the policy enforcement point?
You could have maybe like 2 or 3, but you don't want, you want, those are things that we think of these in sort of like tiers, right? Like tier 1 are certain types of services that you only have one provider and you have to go to one provider because there's value in all being in one provider, right? Email, PKI, that kind of thing. And there are tier 2 providers where it's okay to have a couple of different choices, but you don't want more than like 2 or 3, right? You want to constrain.
Right now, it's going to dozens, right? So that's
and we're trying to rein that in, right? So we have people who are doing things like Microsoft conditional access, like what the Navy's doing. There's companies like my former company that's doing identity aware proxy. There's stuff like Google's identity aware proxy. There's things like Zscaler type things, like other. I mean, pick your company, right? And then there's like the Kubernetes side with what you guys have put together with CNAP and those items. And so you want. You really only want, maybe 2 or 3 different types of options for how you do that for convenience. So for instance, you may want a different solution for SaaS products versus everything else, right? But we're talking like sub 5. Like I can't think of too many. Because you're going to have to integrate the data flows from all those. You're going to have concept of operations for each of those. You're going to need to have defensive cyber operational maneuvers for each of those. And so those are the things where you have like constrained choice. And then there's like a tier below that, which is like just convention, right? Like, so for instance, like programming language choices, you want modern supported, programming languages that have, regular updates to core libraries and stuff like that. But if it kind of meets those constraints, and you can organizationally support it, right? In this type of environment, at least for us, it isn't worth it for us to reach down to that tier, right? And so we are. So if you think about things in those services, it becomes very easy. And actually, we have a giant list of all the core services that we have now in DoD. It's very easy to sort those into those bins, right? And to be able to play strategic intent to say like, actually, we could probably do disaggregated DNS, or actually we need centralized. You could do disaggregated VoIP probably if you have the right sort of session controllers, right? You could have different, maybe you don't want to do it for cost reasons. And so you can actually think about what tier each type of your major IT services goes in, and then through that lens answer why. And that helps you decide what you're going to get after.
Yeah. So I guess, that kind of led me to my initial first question. That's now the 20th, but that's okay. You left obviously a pretty well paying, commercial job.
Mhm.
What pushed you, right, to look at coming to serve into the U.S. government?
So the first of which is the uniqueness of the opportunity, right? So I've been a contractor in and around the government side for probably 10 years at that point and 15 years at that company. And I had kind of grown up in that company. I've had a bunch of different roles as I kind of progressed. And then I got to that role, and I was not learning what I needed to learn. Right. I wasn't exposed to the types of challenges and problem sets. Like I felt like I had gotten kind of comfortable in that position, and that wasn't the right place for me, for the next 5 years of my journey. And so, I took a look around at kind of the available problem sets and the things that really interest me, and understanding how to work at this scale was really attractive. Right. And now, the frustrations of working in the government are not attractive, but you tend to overlook that, right? You tend to say like, yeah, equipment provisioning kind of stinks, and having a CAC reader permanently attached to my Mac kind of stinks. But you can abstract that stuff away and learn to automate and learn to take those constraints on and get really creative and let that be a forcing function for your own innovation, your own creativity. So I took this job first and foremost as an opportunity to grow and learn. Second, because the mission's incredibly important, right? We're often we often talk about the mission. We often talk about the calling of public service and how it feels noble and feels like the right thing to do. And in many ways, it is a moral. Pitching in when you kind of see a need is a moral imperative. I don't want to sort of get overly wrapped up in the sort of the patriotism or the difficulty of our own problem set, right? Because I think those are both distractions from execution. Right. But we need to. It is important to me to make sure that we do what we can to help us transform the institution, right? And to transform the country and to transform where we are, which is this kind of early 1900s manufacturing thinking, to a digital future and a digital government, and to keep the United States as an institution relevant in the world, right? And to keep it, and to make sure that we continue to be the dominant military, to be able to make sure that we continue to fill our international obligations, that the world has a place where, like my kids can grow up kind of in this country, right? This is sort of like where we are planted. And so, you came here, but some of us were fortunate enough to be born here. And so it's the right problem set. It's the right time. We are at that inflection point, it feels like we are so close, right? And that's the thing that keeps me hungry, is that we are so close to getting this right. We're so close. Like, senior leaders increasingly say the right things. Like Secretary Kendall has truly been a brilliant secretary, right? In the way that he understands both the old and the new, right? And understands the organizational change that needs to happen in order to be to continue to be the world's leading Air Force. And so it is. We've got. I left the private sector because I thought we have good leadership, right? I worked with Lauren for a number of years, and I actually knew Venus as well. I knew some of my other coworkers before I took this job, and have I've respected them for a long time. And so it's good to have esteemed colleagues. It's good to work with a lot of people that I've known for a number of years as a contractor, and it was a good transition to make. I'm happy I did it. I'm still happy I did it.
You mentioned the device you're using. One of the things that I tried to do in the job was to make sure that I'm feeling the pain of the airmen, right? And kind of use the same capabilities they have access to. A lot of the people at the Pentagon get special treatment, special devices, special things, so they don't really feel the pain of everybody else, and they often wonder why people are complaining about a problem that they don't see every day, right? And so
That's the bubble.
the best way to feel the problem is to live it every day. You mentioned the Mac device you're using. Is that your device, or you're
Yeah, it's my
using?
personal device, and so I use all of the use the Flow 3 and VDI type capabilities, all of which are allowed.
VDI.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk.
So I feel
later.
the VDI pain.
Yeah, we know, which is fine. We talk later about the. We're not gonna bring it up now, but we'll talk later. I know people had questions about, the fix my computer movement, so we'll be able to cover that later. So it's 1 year. I don't know if you felt like time went by fast
flew.
or not, but
Time absolutely flew.
Yeah. How is it going, and what did you achieve?
I would say it's really challenging, right? It is, for me, it was learning all the other things that I thought I knew about how the government worked, and then learning for real how it worked, right? So there is a lot of the government, more so than a lot of other businesses, is, and not, the Air Force no more so than any of the departments, has a number of arcane processes, right? So we have like the Palm build, and we've got this is how we do budgeting, how we do budgeting in the DoD, which is about 2 years out, right? And then how we get into year of execution, and then how we do requirements generation, and just trying to understand the not very well documented like roles and responsibilities that exist, to understand what the true IT value stream delivery is, all the way through. And so really over the last year, I had worked on a series of kind of larger level problems. It's really kind of broken into three things, right? And so we published a new CIO strategy. We published we kind of determined internally our what we call kind of enabling capabilities, which are the 8 things we need to focus on in order to achieve what we need to achieve. We did a lot of work in and around the OIs, 3 of them in particular, and then also worked on a lot of the sort of strategic budgeting, and figuring out untangling some very specific kind of tactical messes along the way. So it's a sort of mix of very high level things that are 2 to 8 years out, which is almost like an absurd, almost science fiction level of time frame, but necessary, right? Sort of unable to kind of change the way in which we interact with Congress, but then also really understanding what the state of execution is on a number of items. Like, what are we doing in the future of ITAS? What are we doing inside of battle management this year? What are we doing in PACAF, right? What are the things that we have to get right? What are the architectures that we have to settle on for resilience, right? What is the next version of our what's the next version of our black core networking? What is our next version of connectivity with our mission partners? Like, these are all problems, a lot of which, like, you kind of stabbed around at too as well, and kind of in your time in the seat. And so we've made progress on kind of each of those, and from a structural level, and we've moved the conversation really far forward on a lot of them. And so like we're rolling into execution this year on battle management. We're in a CR now, but once that kind of clears up, we're preparing the space to be ready to go for that. With the ABMS consortium, we are preparing our kind of preparing to address some of the architectural challenges with our PACF and USAFE kind of tip of the spear partners right now, and what are the things that are really bogging them down, and what are the actual solutions that would give them real relief to that. And then there's other things as well with inside of DoD. about like, hey, JRSS is going to go away. What does that mean for cooperation? What does that mean to be an executive agent for a COCOM, right? When you remove these architectural linchpins, which were the center of gravity for many, many years, it's a really good thing because it forces you to rethink absolutely everything, right? Those constraints, like we've made more progress with people like, oh my God, JRSS is going away. We have to figure out zero trust. Like, thank God, right? Like, thank God we've got that kind of fire lit underneath us so that we can move out and act. So that I think those are all kind of highlights. The challenges continue to be struggle, right? The scale of having a small office, the scale of needing to work with people who have a lot of senior leader interrupts, right? Mm-hmm. So we get a lot of the DoD, especially the Pentagon, is very like interrupt and tasker heavy, right? Where you have these like things that come down from on high that you have to answer, congressional asks or things that the secretary needs, which are oftentimes secondhand congressional asks. And so it is difficult to keep people outside of the bubble, outside of the thrash, and the incentives are there to answer taskers and to be a part of the Pentagon system, when a lot of times what we need to do is to like set that aside and to continue to make progress, right, for execution outside of those walls and really like focus on outcomes. And so it continues to be a challenge to keep to focus and keep attention on the things that are truly big rocks around, like, what we're doing for, just constantly iterating, for instance, on what we're doing on zero trust, right? We've got a lot of people there. I think the DoD framework for zero trust has like 150 items in it, right? That the existence of that alone is confusing. It's true. There are about that many things that you have to nail inside of zero trust, right? Data security, platform security, identity verification, right? Constant risk adjudication, like all of that stuff is 100% true. But how do we
exploited though? That's an entire cyber posture, not just zero trust.
But. Yeah, that's exactly it. The term zero trust is an impossibly big umbrella, right? That's one of the lessons
learned from this year.
Big, honestly. We made it too big. That's right. We made it too big, and no one understands either what's in it or what's out of it. So we're trying to pull as many things out of the zero trust umbrella as possible, even though it's still an architectural imperative we need to continue to push towards. And it's still relevant from an industry perspective. But the more we use zero trust, zero trust is a term, the less people understand about it. And so we're trying to pull things out into very specific, like EDR, XDR, like platform hardening for endpoint images. Like, that's important. It is a part of zero trust, but let's talk about what that means in specific. Like, let's pull that out. So we're trying very hard to get people.
It's part of cyber.
It's part of cyber. That's exactly right. So
that's the thing, right? Cyber became synonymous to zero trust, and in fact, we had a great episode last week, with Gary on debunking zero trust, and we talked about kind of the bloated term, and that started, by the way, with a publication with this doing the zero trust strategy document that I non-concurred on because it was bloated. But it was published as is, so that's what you get. So, you talk about achievement, which are, great long lists. A lot of people were asking on social media here. People see often publications of strategy documents, right, or any kind of paperwork as an achievement, particularly in the Pentagon, right? Most people are more concerned about tangible in production, capabilities that the warfighter can use. So they were asking, is there one you can name that would be more a production outcome than, publication or discussions or things like that?
So let's think, for particular tangible outcomes in production.
Even if it's not deployed, across the enterprise, but it's in use and it's something that people can consume, I guess.
Yeah, let's see here. I'll have to get back to you on that, right? Because I'm trying to think about what's actually in production and what we can talk about publicly. Let me get back to you on that.
Right. Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of things that are in motion right now. I mean, we give a lot of examples of things that are in pre-production.
Right.
The truth is, just to be very honest, the truth is in 22, we didn't have a lot of execution dollars for a lot of stuff, right?
Right.
And a lot of the discretionary, a lot of the funding profiles in sort of fiscal year 22 were like keep the lights on profiles, right? And so like I think the G Fund cutover was today or whatever, right? But a lot of this stuff happens in 23, and the way that it was programmed, and so we had to do a lot of homework in 22 and didn't ship a lot of stuff is what I would say is the
The
answer.
first year is usually not the first. I don't think I got anything done really my first year other than paperwork. My second year was when I started to really get stuff in production, so that's pretty common.
Yeah, and we've done like for instance, we've gotten our act together around the financial the FIR requirements that the comptroller needs. We've gotten our hands around what we're going to be doing. IWN was a really big success this year, actually. So we really demonstrated working. I'll go with that as my answer, right? So at Valiant Shield this year, we demonstrated resilient multimodal networking on top of a black core.
Explain to people. Most people don't know. Give a little bit of insight
Yeah.
as what
Okay. So here's the concept. The concept is that that nothing matters unless you have resilient comms. And a cyber capable adversary enables global reach, right? And they're able to disrupt comms from the other side of the world. They don't have to be local. And so you need to have a place where you need to have an architecture where you say like, okay, you have a contested connectivity through a cyber capable adversary who kind of knows where your locations are. That means you need to be able to use any form of connectivity, and you need to be able to securely go over it. And that means whether or not it is fiber, LTE or 5G even, satellite, whether or not that's Starlink or Milsatcom, or even host nation Wi-Fi, right? So we often joke around about being able to launch planes from a Korean Starbucks, right? So you need any source of connectivity possible, and you need a solution which isn't tied to that. So you have to have your connectivity strategy and your WAN strategy be divorced, and right now they're not, especially on SuperNet. And so you have this concept of a black core using commercial solutions for classified. You're able to run this resilient mesh on top of an SD-WAN enabled baseline. And then
it could be a dirty network, right?
That's 100%. And in fact, having we need to move to the place where your locality is able to purchase any connectivity that you have available, right? And then we can securely put our traffic on top of it that meets all the NSA standards. And we can run all of our different classification levels on it. And then if something happens, your traffic will instantly reprioritize and you will go to a different modality. And we demonstrated that working this year at Valiant Shield. And so that's going to be the baseline for how we do connectivity going forward, right? And it's a large rethinking of Doden and like the Doden product suite, right? And so we're in conversations.
That's a DAF, right? Project, not a DoD.
It's a DAF project, but huge amount of interest from joint partners as well, and exactly kind of what our relationship to various COCOMs are, right? Because if we're doing this and we are in a different service provider role, right? And so it is DAF, and it's DAF provided, and it's something that we're going to put at DAF installations in the future. But it has wider implications, especially as we think about other SD-WAN providers.
Do you think MPCO is going to embrace this and use it for the mission partner environment stuff?
Yes and no. The mission partner environment has a very unique telco issue about connectivity. Right. And so whether or not there is enough middle mile connectivity in telco strategy for MPCO is still TBD. If they do, then this is obviously it's available to them, we're the executive agent and it's there, but it only makes sense if you have a certain density of like last and middle mile circuits, which I'm not 100% sure that MPCO does. Otherwise you're just running a bunch of overhead to just traditionally route. So there is, it's available. We're still developing it. The MPC use case, because of the carrier stuff, is a little bit more exotic.
But the box could be used with 5G and Starlink and things like that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's right. Yes. And so, but then we have to, there's a lot of like international affairs stuff that's sort of wrapped up in this, like who pays for it and and how you get connected, that sort of thing, and what your pop strategy is. Those conversations are ongoing. Like we had some of those conversations even last week.
But did MPCO take a look at it?
The MPCO MPCO itself is not looking at it right this second. We are talking with our commercial partners about what those offerings would look
that's
like.
surprising to me. I think we're cutting the middleman. That's supposed to be the middleman to the mission partners, but
they have a they're working connectivity in a different
wrong way. Yeah, that's the wrong way.
It's a very it's a very carrier centric way, right? It's the same way that if you were
you're
to, like,
solving their problem, but
devices,
they're not even looking at the solution. That's
we're trying to we are working through getting the solution, having a cohesive solution to go to them with. So we're still in the architecture phase on exactly what that looks like. But yeah, no. So we're in discussions with commercial partners for like pop strategies and stuff.
I hope they do, right? Because MPCO is probably the most important program in the entire DoD. So
it's incredibly important. It's like it is in fact like secret releasable cloud. Like if you want to boil it down to like problem, secret releasable cloud is probably the number one problem in the DoD in my mind.
All it was gonna take was $12 million, and the DoD couldn't find it for us to finish the MVP. So that's why I left the department. So anyway, interesting. So let's move on. So what you talked a lot already about some of the stuff you learned, but give us a rundown on the main things, right? That you kind of mostly learning by struggle, right? Not the easy stuff, right?
Right. The real struggles are I guess the advice is everything in the DoD is somebody's job, but many things are nobody's job. And so, when somebody somewhere wrote a requirement for something, right? For instance, right? Like there are all these requirements that are floating out, all these regulations that are floating out, right? But it's difficult to know whether or not those are informed by reality or informed by good ideas. And so there is so much history because the value stream is so broken up. And we want to kind of continually shift left on a lot of this stuff. And
most are stuck in time.
What'd you say?
Most are stuck in time too.
Yeah. And a lot of stuff is really old, or these old regs are still in place. So trying to understand the regulatory framework, the roles and responsibilities framework, like who makes the decisions on these things, if we have some budgetary number someplace, you're like, where, how did this budgetary number come to be, right? Like, how did you arrive at this number for your programmatic input, right? So that's one thing. Another thing that I've had to ask I still don't have a particularly great answer on is I constantly ask myself, what is the role of an executive in the DoD? What is the role of a civilian 2-letter executive, right? What's our job? And there are a lot of very subtle answers to that, right? Some of those answers are things like, we're here to be a 2-letter, right? That's one obvious. One answer is the office, right? You're here to represent the office, right? And that's a very surface level answer. Is the answer for us that we are here to be decision makers? Are we here to be kind of organizational spokespeople for the function of the CIO? And it's not so much about us as executives as much as that we're just sort of a head of an organization doing CIO things. Or are we sort of responsible for creating an environment, right? Is it our job to focus on risks and outcomes that individuals aren't seeing, right? And for us to kind of make these broad, calculated strategic adjustments. And it's some mixture of all three of those, of being the office, of being a decision maker, of being an organizational head, and being a person who is given the authority and latitude to look above the fray and say, this system isn't producing good outcomes. And it's difficult. It has been constantly difficult to, first off, it's very interesting to hear what people's answer to that question is. It's like, what is the role of an executive? But it's also challenging to figure out how other people view these jobs, right? Especially when we have a proliferation of HQEs and other types of experts that kind of muddy whether or not we should be expertise providers or decision makers or whatever. And so trying to define that role very crisply helps guide those actions, right? We've also learned really a lot about like just personal time management, right? There's so many problems that you can chase, right? It's like an infinite field of problems. You can go down any rabbit hole that you can choose. And so you have to figure out, like, what are you best at? What are you uniquely qualified to do, right? And what are the biggest areas that require your attention, like Secret Rel Cloud, right? like I have to constantly push on that, right? So that it gets attention. So it is, a lot of it is about myself personally. A lot of it's about the org.
What do you think something that's literally the most important problem is something that's often dismissed like that? It's not even a hard problem, I would argue.
Because
I think
people
we can get it done in 2 months.
Because people don't see the full end point. They can't see the outcome of that decision is 5 or 6 steps away removed. And so you can't say, you know, it's very easy to like, it's our job is like, you know, I often say my job is the tech narrator of the Air Force, right? I have to tell the story that helps people connect to the outcome. And for things like Secret Rel, you have to say, the most important thing for us, the thing that differentiates the US, is that we have true friends, right? Right? We are part of a group of nations that has true friends. That's one of our enduring military strengths. And if we get to a situation where we have to share data with those friends, we do not want to be limited by, you know, we're going to be able to scale quickly in ways that we don't understand. Therefore, the most important thing that we need to do is nail our our connection to our partners and enable them to be in the fight with us, right? And it becomes very, very, very easy to lose sight of that when you're like, oh, we talk about this from a risk or a buying or a policy or an authorities perspective, right? But if you don't clearly see what the outcome is, it's hard to get the right. It's hard to think about your piece of it to be able to make the right decision with the right urgency.
Yeah. Interesting. So, you know, what have you seen that's just not working?
What is not working? It is,
other than the NPCO team. Sorry, just kidding.
So things that are not working are, the budget doesn't serve us well.
And I think that has to do also with the fact that you guys don't have acquisition authority, and you know, when I need you, I can tell you that really never was a huge problem for at least non-massive investments, which I would argue most of the problems we talked about on a few, you know,
you make something and you can sub 5 million in a pile of places, right? Like you peanut butter like $5 million in a bunch of places and you make a ton of progress, right? Because your starter dollars is not the problem, scaling dollars, right? So a premature percent of scale is part of the problem, that because you end up backfilling your budgets. Disconnection from outcomes, right? So people don't see, we don't see that. Like, one of the things that I'm working on is the concept of roadmap publication, which is to say, you know, staff needs to publish their opinion on different things. You know, what's our opinion for UC? What's our opinion for DNS? You know, what do we want to see? Where do we want to see VPNs go away? Right? What is our vision for Active Directory? Like, we need to get pretty nuanced views on this stuff so that we can head towards a good outcome and to be able to see time phasing. So what's working well? Time phasing. So the timing for all of these things, because different things are off. Like, one of the things we noticed this year was our ICAM strategy was not going to be in time for our zero trust timeline. Right?
Even the zero trust timeline is not in time for the place relevant, but yeah.
Yeah, no. We're late to need on a ton of these capabilities, right? Straight up. But like in particular, as we're rolling into,
that adds to it, yeah.
Yeah, it adds to it, right? Like, we don't have the foundational services to even like do the thing that we want to do in 23 that we have money to do, right? So we're like, okay, we have to, and so we chopped it all up, and my apologies to that team if any of these people are watching that podcast. But we had to really rearrange that, right? And we're in the process now of like finding an alternate agile vehicle to make a smaller targeted buy on some of these capabilities so we can move out and be ready for zero trust. So and it's because
it wasn't really a money problem.
No, that's not a money problem. It is a time sequencing and being able to see
But
the
they
fixture.
argued it was not you, but they argued it always. I mean, every time I talked to the ICAM team, they talked about the money.
Yeah, and it is not it is not necessarily a funding problem per se, but it is a understanding of strategically where we need to be by a certain time frame to be able to get those milestones correct.
Just an agile lack of agile basic understanding of how to do business. I mean, it's just I feel like just on the way to be agile.
That you really like digging in there and trying to drive agile instincts
Right.
in organizations. We have another thing that's really screwed up that isn't working is we continually don't feel the risk of inaction.
And it's interesting, right? Because unlike companies, we're not competing live, so you don't really feel the pain of lack of competition. If one day there's a war against China, we might feel it, but until that happens, it's like, we're getting away with it.
We're in the early parts of the poker hand, you know what I mean? And we have to have an urgency about delivery that it's hard to keep up, and we know that it burns people out, and so we have to figure out how we keep pace sustainably but go faster than what we're doing. And that like we're hedged against all types of like business risk and funding risks and stuff like that, and that doesn't allow us to focus on the outcome risk or the delivery risk or the operations risk, right? And so we've got to get better and more aligned with those risks, which are the ones that are really the outcomes are the ones that truly matter, right? And to be just laser focused on outcomes.
Good. All right. Well, that's pretty much in line with what I've seen. So, what are your 3 wishes for Christmas?
For continuing resolution to be over with. So that's
Congress to their job.
Yep, that's my first wish.
Term limits.
Hatch Act and all, won't say anything to that. But the you're free to. You're out of this. What I'll say
I said it for you. It's okay.
Yep, thanks. And for us, we need to get our Zero Trust and ICAM roadmaps out and published publicly so that people know what we're executing and when and how we're getting after it, and so that we can get public scrutiny on it. We need to really have a better vision for what our connectivity strategy is for next year. So we have to get our I need to have a good sense of how we are going to drive comms resilience across the kind of across the department. And so we need a good strategy there. We need to get ABMS DI off the ground so that they can start laying that infrastructure and get early returns from that. So very, very excited for those upcoming motions.
Basic Christmas wishes.
Basic Christmas wishes. Well,
those 3 were pretty basic. Non.
Yeah, they're not particularly wild.
You don't need God to show up to make that happen, I guess.
I'm hoping. I mean, if Santa wants to bring my kids something nice, so I can skip some of the holiday shopping rush, that would be appreciated.
All right, so let's talk about the Fix My Computer. You're not using it, so you don't feel the pain. Shame on you.
I do feel the pain, certainly. I have a GFE, I have a GFE iPad.
And in your garage.
No, I have one. It's in my bag. I use it. It's what I use mobily, and I have my MacBook and VDI. So we've made a lot of progress on Fix My Computer. One of the really interesting things that we have in the department is a chief experience officer, is Colt Woodall. But the Colt is really interesting because I don't think of him as a user experience officer, although he has 20 years of user experience and he's got his arms around these problems. What makes him unique is that he's a chief outcomes officer, and so it's really interesting to have an executive, right? The same way that you might have a chief risk officer or a chief In some ways that's sort of what a CISO is supposed to be. But we have a person. Colt is looking at. We have instrumented what users feel. So how long Outlook takes to start up, how long, how slow disks are, how often, Adobe crashes. We measure all sorts of stuff now, right? And we have a sampling of endpoint agents that we get data on, and we look at it per geography. We look at it per hardware model. We look at it all kinds of different dimensions. And so, and then we have an IT user survey pulse that goes out, right? That measures it's a variant of Net Promoter Score. If you've ever used something like that, like, would you recommend Air Force IT to a friend? Yes or no, right? And so a couple of interesting things. So we've seen performance increase over the last year, and we've seen user satisfaction increase over the last year. And so we're like, okay, cool. Why? Right. And the answer is kind of boiled down to a few things, right? So first of which is we pushed out Modern Office, right? So we're on most recent Office. We moved to so like whenever you launch, we used to have like the 2018 or whatever version of Word, and it was like a little bit janky. It wasn't as like the web version was better, right? Like there are some problems there. But we have the new modern optimized versions of that software suite. We have network-based patching, right? So we just do direct patching for Windows Update for Business. And then we've cleaned up a lot of the GPOs. So a lot of the policy stuff has been really pared down. The CCC has really been leading that effort to scrub that out. And surprisingly, the number one thing that fixes computers is a solid state hard drive, which is a completely mind-blowing thing. Like if you said to me, like, actually you can solve a lot of UX problems by just like giving everyone a slightly better laptop, right? Yeah. Or is absolutely massive. And so we've also raised the minimum standards for computers that you can purchase, and have adjusted the centralized buying vehicles to do that. There's like a lot of like policy stuff that kind of goes into that. But we've replaced, I think it's something like 60% of all hard drives in the Air Force just by swapping them out. And newer computers delivered to people that run modern Office and modern Windows and everything are huge. We have to do this, right? So this isn't something that we can drag our feet on for a lot of reasons. First off, it's a moral imperative, right? People use their computers for everything to get things done. But really, we have to be ready for Windows 11, which means you kind of need a modern computer for everything. You need like the TPM module inside of each of those computers. There's a lot of stuff that you have to get to. Again, CCC is really tracking. We have a whole Windows 11, like, we have every single laptop in the Air Force, like how many of them are Windows 11 ready. And so we're just going to keep aggressively swapping those out, keep aggressively reducing the solutions, looking at exactly like streamlining our EDR and XDR solutions. Right now we have two. We probably need to get down to one. We're looking at a few options. The ITAS vehicle, once that's ready to go, we're going to really push onto that vendor to streamline those devices. So we are making steady progress on it, and we're not where we should be. Again, I use VDI for several reasons, but one of which is that my MacBook honestly, the reason why I use my MacBook is because I have scripting support, right? And for things like, and this is interesting, right? So we talk a lot about what are the personas that we have to support for desktops, and developers are one of them, right? And so, fix my computer for developers is probably further away, right? And that's going to continue to be a challenge as well. So what are the platforms that we need to give developers to do their job? What do we need to give for data scientists to use their job? The next evolution of this stuff, and this will get easier as we get better attribute support in the ICAM solution in the next year, is what are the role personas that you have, right? And then what is the computer that you are entitled to for budgeting and for licensing and stuff like that based upon your persona and permissions, right? So are you a developer? Are you allowed to have scripts on your laptop? Are you allowed to, are you writing stuff and checking in code? Can you run Docker on a GFE workstation, right? There's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of stuff here about permissions and about connectivity that are going to be unlocked when we get to better zero trust, better identity, and better budgetary management associated with those concepts. So a lot of work left to do here, but those are the next series steps for us.
Yeah, we were trying to create a developer GFE approved image, but that never happened. And that's definitely something that's very much needed. Same for other person, as you mentioned, cyber, maybe data science.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as you're not asking the CTO to do it because he believes, enlisted should not have access to email. So that's probably not the right answer. But
So that's a very interesting thing. So let's talk about that for 1 minute. So the push for Gmail is interesting business decision, right? Where you say, okay, we need to be able to have an interesting amount of competitive pressure in this system, right? We can get a good, attractive licensing deal, and you don't need to have a full like E3 license for you're like your E1s and E2s, right? People who aren't yet kind of in their in their first initial duty stations. So having something where you can just conduct an official business or issue orders, making sure that they have connectivity and collaboration with Gmail is really interesting. It's also really interesting because if you look at the recruit people who are coming out of high schools, people who are coming out of colleges, coming into the army or into the military the first time, you're actually, if you think about their experience, giving them Gmail, right, a gmail.mil for their first experience is like, it's a little bit of a less cold water bath, right? Because a lot of academic institutions use that. Now, a lot of academic institutions use Microsoft as well. But it is, there are a lot of interesting positive benefits commercially for competition, for access to information, and to really give yourself tools to look at different licensing schemes for that. So I think it's an interesting experiment. I definitely I think it was the right call for the Army. Right, stuff breaks down at Army licensing scale, having been a contractor over there before this job, and so I understand why they made that decision, and I'm very interested to see how it plays out from a user experience and a quality of service perspective.
So there's a couple of thoughts, right? One, you had mentioned that it's very important to have only a single email stack. I would argue they could have negotiated the same deal with Microsoft. I like the competition aspect, but I can tell you this is not what was a driver of this. The real driver was, the Army CIO decided not to buy the licenses to save money and spend on other things, including his new cloud office, which, was his decision. He said, in front of me that effectively, because enlisted would not be able to complain hard enough to the Secretary of the Army, he didn't care if they liked it or not. And then he, proceeded to not buy the licenses with Microsoft and reduce the number of licenses with that budget so he could do other things. Then because of the backlash, right, and people complaining, mostly because I posted it on LinkedIn, then he started to have engagements with Google that reached out to him proactively with a heavily discounted first 2-year engagement, which obviously after 2 years the price is going to be multiplied by 10 or 20, with a massive discount. That's one would even wonder the legality of this, by the way. But once they bought the licenses at a heavy discount, that's when they deployed the unlisted aspect of this. And so I don't think it was a conscious decision, that we're making it look like now like if it was all planned. None of this was actually planned. The plan was not to have licenses for unlisted, period, and not just reduce licenses, just no licenses whatsoever. But then now Google as a hook, right? They gave this at a massive discount with no competition ready. That's I wonder the legality of this again. But then now you're locked in, right? So what's going to happen when it's time to renew the licenses? And then you mentioned the user experience and the fact that having multiple, email solution is not ideal. Well,
It's
now
not
you
ideal. That's
compounded
right.
that problem too, right? So so I'm not putting you on the spot. I want you to specifically answer on what you have not, that was before you started the job. So you probably did not get
So
to participate in those meetings, but I was there.
what I'll say to that is that it was conducted legally. There was no there's no I have a lot of the insider facts about how that was put together. The cost and competition are at least again, I don't have a personal relationship with Dr. Iyer, right? But from people on the ground who are doing implementing, cost and competition were heavy factors, as well as in incoming user experience. And so I think I think if the Army's made that decision, right, I'm not going to talk them out of it, and I think we have a lot to learn there. And kind of embracing that learning, I think is going to be a good thing. So the G Suite and other collaboration capabilities, there is an incentive there to have better interoperable solutions, and we're going to see that more and more. And so things like if they had developed calendar sharing between the two, right? Maybe that would work out, right? I mean, this is and Army also has a bunch of other mission sets that are really similar to this. Army Corps of Engineers, right? Because they have the Army Corps of Engineer mission and also domestic U.S. waterways of all things, right? And so they have a lot of use cases that are very weird. And I think Army Corps of Engineers uses G Suite as well. So there's precedent there. I think there's a lot to learn. I'm happy that they're doing it. We're kind of following along for their experience, and I think it's an interesting service model. So and honestly, if Google jacks the price up again, I'm sure Microsoft will be ready to come in and be competitive on it. So we'll see.
Probably, yeah, no doubt. So you talked about the laptop. I guess what's the update? You mentioned the ICAM and that there's a whole new engagement. So maybe quickly.
Yeah, we'll talk about ICAM. So right now, the FIRE requirements are driving a lot of those elements as the financial remediation for financial feeder systems. We have a plan ahead. We're working with our FMNMG partners as well as H&I, ACC, and others to forge a way ahead that we can meet our CPG guidelines, our CPG deadlines. And so our things like separation of duties and better financial accountability are congressional mandates, and so we have to kind of answer the mail on those for those stakeholders. But so we've kind of chopped up that solution a little bit. We've moved that to the left, and then we are now in collaboration, like very early collaboration, about what our deployed solutions are going to look like in terms of what the next stack is for software factories and kind of the DevSecOps enabled ecosystem for what the kind of enterprise SaaS offering is going to look like, right? SaaS to them, right? But then, like, how do you get attributes? How do you get user objects? How do we standardize on those systems so that our DevSecOps community has a consistent identity experience, whether or not they are connected to the enterprise cloud, if you will, or if you are in a deployed environment or not connected to an enterprise environment, right? So and so we've had those initial conversations. We have those kind of conversations daily with the Platform One teams, Kessel Run, and others. And so we're trying to in a really agile fashion figure out who needs to implement what this year so that we can get to a consistent end state and how we define that end state. So it's a new way of working. I'm really pleased with the progress that we're making on it. And we will have things to show for it really very quickly once we're out of CR.
Good. Hopefully that's going to happen soon. What about data centricity?
Oh man, data centricity. Okay, my default answer to data centricity is that data centricity doesn't matter if you don't have comms resilience, right? So it doesn't matter if you have a data centric environment if you can't get your data. But data centricity is, it's at the top of the Maslow's hierarchy of data needs, right? Like, so you have to have ICAM in place, you have to have an MPE strategy in place, you have to have connectivity in place, you have to have your workload management in place. Once you have all that in place, you can get towards data centricity. Data centricity right now is we have a bunch of gravity around certain data platforms. So we're what we call the big six. So we have Intel, cyber, logistics. All these different domains have these like kind of big hunks of data that they are invested in. And so we're bringing these together with kind of a data fabric solution, which is going to be kind of our API indirection layer. And so what that's going to be is my vision for that is we're going to have a central place where we're going to enforce MPE API standards, cleaned, monitored, managed data catalog for data providers coming out of those big six platforms as they kind of get liberated. And then what that means to be able to do things like local data caching and other attributes that make it appropriate for usage in the field. So there's a lot of homework to do here. We are doing that homework right now based inside of what I would say are all proprietary-ish data platforms, just because that's just the nature of them. And then we're going to move to a more open data fabric standard coming up this year.
Very cool. Impressive. So we talk about zero trust a little bit, but have you seen progress when it comes to timelines?
So I think we're gearing up for execution in 23, and the CR is holding that up. But we've got a good early roadmap for who's going to do what and when and how we're going to scale it out. So we know the hardware based, the long pole in zero trust for us is bolting capacity onto our existing infrastructure. And so right now that's based inside of our cyber weapon systems. We've kind of laid that flat. We know exactly how we're going to deploy that capacity out so that we can get STPs and policy enforcement, policy decision points out to various locations as to where that data is. We're working on some cloud baseline elements. CNAP has kind of their roadmap laid out for this year. And then, working with Thunderdome to figure out what they're going to do. And so we're getting after some very early things in PACAF, starting like last week for this year execution on PDI dollars. And so we're making progress. And then we have both the near-term execution plan just about firmed up, and then how that scales into ITAS and other kind of larger, bigger budget efforts for how we both discover the applications that are out there, make sure that we have the identity strategy and the identity services and the identity governance ready to go, and then how we interact with both the high end at the DevSecOps ecosystem and the lower end for applications that are really your at-risk applications that we have to continue to segment and do the right thing on. So we have a series of vignettes for what that looks like. And it's in refinement now. We're expected to have a full publishable plan by around the end of the month.
Very cool. All right. Usual question: what keeps you up at night?
It's the pace, right? Like, it'll never be fast enough, right? It'll never be quick enough. That you see the pace at which what we have to get done, right? Like, part of the problem of thinking about outcomes and thinking about timelines and then kind of working backwards from timelines is that those timelines get really, really, really crunched, and you have to get other people to see the problem the same way to drive that urgency. And the timelines will always make me really nervous about what we have to get done and when, by what capability we need to demonstrate, by what we need to work on, by the problem sets that we need people to get after. So urgency, timelines, execution. There are like lots of cyber risk profiles that keep me up at night. Like, there are a lot of pretty sophisticated, we have a sophisticated offense side, we have a pretty sophisticated defense side, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. So, we're doing, we're continuing, vulnerability disclosure programs. We're continuing to do bug bounty programs, just trying to spend good first dollars to cover down on a lot of that cyber risk, and just to demonstrate what's out there. And also, one of the other things that keeps me up at night is the attention span of funding, right? And so O&M dollars are, they're very ephemeral. They come and go, and we maintain a lot of very key functionalities on O&M dollars. And so the programmatic elements of making sure that we have real sustainment dollars around real services, and to make sure that we don't lose focus on paying for the things that we need to pay for, like various common services and that sort of thing. That also keeps me up at night, because there's just so much stuff moving around that people don't understand. Like, yeah, no, we have to continue to eat our vegetables and continue to pay for the services that we need.
Right. Last question before we go to the public question.
All right.
If our dear friend Lauren, the FOCI, decides to leave the job, would you consider taking the job?
So, I mean, that's one of those things that I've thought a lot about. In the short term, whatever I do, and I've said this publicly and privately. Whatever I do, the most important thing for me to do is to set up the office of the CIO for success. And I wouldn't want to take that job if I didn't feel like I was doing my all to set up the CIO for success, right? I mean, because I work for her, and if I'm not doing my best to make her successful, if I took that job, I wouldn't be successful. So, or truly whoever takes that job. And so it would be a huge change for my family, right? I'm up here in Boston, in our nice crunchy leaf fall weather. And so, again, that job is really only effective in the building in the Pentagon, making those relationships. So it's something, it's something I would certainly consider. But for right now, it's just thinking about the structures of execution in and around the IT environment to make her or anybody else in that position successful is kind of my main focus.
You still didn't give me an answer, though.
Would I take the CIO job? I don't know what they offered to me. We'll find out. We'll see.
Okay.
I will certainly I will strongly entertain it. Yes.
Okay.
But I also have to figure out what's next for me, right? So the question is like whenever that happens to be, what am I still learning here? Am I still growing? Like, those are the questions I have to answer for myself.
Right. Yep. All right. Quick answers for these so I can keep you on schedule.
All right.
We have quite a few questions from the public, but I want to answer a few. I'll try to keep it to like 30 seconds.
Yeah, let's lightning round this.
All right. What is the big challenge that you see that will require help outside of the Air Force?
Making the Air Force smaller. And so the Air Force is really siloed. Some of our best opportunities to make the Air Force smaller are people who touch lots and lots of places inside the Air Force. So, for us, like, just to go back to the Secret Rel example, like, if we try and if I were to send out a tasker, right, and be like, tell me everything that you're doing with Mission Partner Cloud or whatever, that would take months to get bad data back, right? Or I should call up Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Oracle,
and know right away.
That's exactly it. And so
I did it. Yeah, so
and but knowing
have a signal chat,
right, or whatever. But knowing where the strength of the network is, whether or not it's inside the building, whether or not it's outside the building. We require people who are dedicated, who want to see us succeed, and who want to be good vendors to us and say, hey, maybe it's not in my best financial interest 5% to sell you a bunch of different X. Let's get one really good X and make that excellent. So opportunities for us to centralize, to build the right centralized service, and to get information about how we're actually executing on the ground is going to be really key. So any opportunity, and our partners have been really good at this, especially our big integrator partners, our big cloud partners have been really good at trying to connect programs to make us smaller. Please keep doing that. We rely on it more than we should. But thank you for doing that.
Okay, that wasn't short. Let's try again. What are the criteria used to decide between build with open source, of course, in a decentralized way, or buy through centralized catalog, for example?
So the question, the one way to think about, there's a couple different ways to think about cloud, right? The first way to think about cloud is what is having an entirety of an ecosystem that's automatable, right? So account creation, networks, network policy, permissions, users, keys, workloads, all of that stuff is one part of cloud. The other part of cloud is it allows you to build on top of these services that shrink your workload down to the smallest unique kernel. And when you think about like, okay, what is the actual effect of the thing that you're trying to accomplish? And it requires a pretty technically opinionated understanding of the effect you're trying to achieve. So I would say when you have build or buy, if you have a clean value stream between your stated business intent, like what is the outcome that you need, versus all the ways in which you can change the organization to achieve that outcome, and then figure out what that last mile for technology is. It's like, get the people part right, get the outcomes right first, and then build or buy becomes pretty obvious, right? Because you'll know whether or not there is a commercial product that lets you jump that. And the other thing is don't be in love with the difficulty of your own problems, right? That's like the key advice, is that, like, we've got unique cyber challenges, but not about as unique as banks, right? So like, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn that are effectively solve problems, and we just need to organize ourselves in a different way to get those outcomes.
Yeah, and don't let the 5% become the reason to build something from scratch when you could actually.
If it doesn't add value, that's exactly it. If it doesn't add value, then don't do it.
All right, try again with a 30 second. That was a minute and a half.
Okay, 30 seconds.
All right. So from agility and DevSecOps maturity point of view, is a company that releases more frequently security updates more or less secure than a company that does it once a month?
So it is not. So you need to ask the question: what is aligned to the right value, right? And the right value is responsiveness, right? And responsiveness and resilience. And so if you are releasing things and you're not breaking anything, then absolutely faster is better, right? But
and in this case, we're specifically mentioning security updates. So I would argue the faster the better, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes, right. But if you're destroying operations, right, you don't want to do that, right? Right. So you don't want to break things, right? So if you have the resilience and you can prove that what you're doing, like you have good automated testing and everything like that, then yeah, please ship it out faster.
Right? The faster the better, as long as you're not breaking things.
That's right.
See, that's a 30 seconds answer, right?
There you go.
Any update on what might be replacing the current CAC?
The death of the CAC has been widely talked about. We are going to be incorporating MFA into our larger strategy for access. The larger PIV ecosystem is not going away anytime soon. It is here to stay for quite some time. They're fine. They're janky. They don't work on mobile. Like, they have problems. They have legitimate problems.
You have to go in a building and you have to go to the airport. Go find something to replace this anytime soon that brings you MFA, crypto signing.
Yeah, they're an inconvenient but technically superior solution.
Yeah. Hey, look, you have derived credentials on mobile, right? So it's just we don't know how to implement it, but that's not a CAC problem, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And look, get into the building, the doors and stuff. What's better than a CAC? It's just perfect. I don't know. Whatever.
It's a real ID for getting.
I never understood why people complain about CACs, other than the way we issue. I think the bigger problem is how we run it and manage it and issue the CACs, and how long it takes to get a CAC for a contractor and stuff. And even civilians and military, and all that.
PKI,
that nonsense should be fixed, but that's not the CAC. If you had a different factor, it would be the same problem.
And PKI is often challenging for things like developer middleware. So there are other form factors. Like, not everything can deal with like a PKCS11 container, for instance, right? So like, not all scripting languages handle that well. So yeah, there's lots of reasons where it doesn't work, but by and large, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. All right. So lots of great discussion on centralizing tech, but what's the good word on centralizing governance?
Centralizing governance is challenging because we're doing a lot of work right now around decision domains and around who needs to make the right decisions. I would say that policy is not my area of strong suit, right? And so the way in which that we feed things to governance, I think, could use work, right? So it's very difficult to get, and again, this goes back to the question of like, what's the role of an executive, right? How we do distributed information gathering so that it comes up to a decision point. We know who the right person is to make a decision, and that person has enough data to make that decision quickly, and then it can go to execution. That value cycle was continually challenging. We are iterating over it. the jury's still out in my mind whether or not that structure produces good outcomes or how do we make it better. So I have a lot more to learn about how those the especially when you get down to like title authorities and command authorities, what that actually means. So I don't have a great answer for that question.
Yeah,
but it is something, agile governance is something we have to do. We have to do better. So
you mentioned the use of VDI. Is this a direction for developers as well?
VDI is a stopgap, right? So VDI there's a lot of really good properties for VDI. One of the good properties for VDI is, oftentimes asset losses aren't data losses, right? So thin clients and zero clients have some, especially in commercial solutions classified
Assuming
world.
it's a zero client, though, not every VDI is zero client, right?
Not every VDI is a client. That's exactly right. Right. So there are some benefits to it, and so in certain circumstances, true zero clients are going to be really the way to go and are a part of our desktop deployment systems. Net, most developers don't like VDI as an experience. It's a stopgap. So I don't think it's the right solution. So I know how you feel, but I don't think it's the right solution long term.
It's good to have an option, right? It's
right.
good option.
But it's an option, and it's a great option for people whose computers have just died, right?
Yeah.
Or for reservists.
There's plenty of good use cases.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be a replacement to fixing GFE, right?
No. That doesn't get us off the hook there.
Yeah. All right, last one. How can we assume breach and believe in defense in depth at the same time?
Defense in depth is a defense in depth is a weird term, and I don't think we don't really talk about that as much anymore, right? There are lots of different when we look at security from a risk informed perspective. There are lots and lots of different types of risks that we have, and we have to be able to cover different types of risks at different places and different areas of the stack. And assume breach says you can't that just because something is in a particular position or in a particular place in the network, you can't assume its state. And so I don't think those things are entirely incompatible, but you have to think about them in the right way to get to an actual security outcome.
It's layers of security.
It's layers of security, right? Right, exactly. Layers of security and layers of risk mitigation that you have to think about to get there. So there's nothing wrong with layered approaches.
Breach for each layer of defense, but still believe in defense in depth to
right.
mitigate
And you have to also have to ask yourself, like, what happens for each of these layers when something's compromised? What happens when a credential is stolen? What happens when a laptop is stolen? What happens when your ACE deployment kit is stolen? What happens when your crypto key is stolen? Like you have to think about each of those things for assumed breach, and then consider the risk and the mitigation for it.
Yeah, you gave me great feedback on my Uber breach video, so people that missed it should watch the Uber breach video that shows you a little bit of lateral movement of the malicious actor, right? And how
it's incredible. It's incredible.
Death could have prevented it, right?
Yeah, it's incredible about how incredibly complex systems like that lead to bad outcomes. So it's yeah. I mean, security and IT will continue to humble us all.
I like it. So, like always, I'm going to give you the last words, but before that, I'm going to remind everybody of the next episode. The next episode will be next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have a great guest again with Dan Wilson, who is a co-founder and CTO of Control Plane, the company behind what I guess our friends at Google, Microsoft, and Amazon and others don't like too much, which is building a complete cloud-agnostic control plane and having the same capabilities running across multiple clouds with no impact to your capabilities. And so he's going to share with us kind of the benefits, the issues of using kind of an agnostic layer of management and how they built it over a few years and kind of the vision behind it. So it's going to be interesting next week. If you're interested in being agnostic to your cloud layer, it's going to be a fun discussion. Wanted to thank you, of course, Jay, again for joining us. I think we learned a lot. We've seen, the great work you're doing and how much you understand of the challenges the warfighter are facing and how much you care about trying to help fixing them. So I certainly hope that if Lauren decides to leave, you're going to strongly consider taking the job. That's for sure. And Meantime, we're going to give you the last words. Thank you
All
for
right,
joining us.
I'll ask you for a recommendation letter at the time. No, but so
Sure,
last
that's be helpful.
or a recommending LinkedIn post or what. No, but so what I'll say is one of the places where we have to figure this out as a community is for everybody to stay dissatisfied and continue to look towards the models of the future for how we digitally transform government writ large. We look to interesting technologies that are going to change the world, things like Bitcoin, ways in which we drive transparency, ways in which we do digital governance, ways in which we look at models for decision making and consensus, and it is going to change. It is going to eventually revolutionize the way that we look at governing, and the way that we look at execution and operations. And if you haven't thought about kind of throwing in and taking a job in the government, it is an exciting set of challenges. You will learn a lot about yourself. You will learn a lot about other people. But for people who are in it, thank you, and continue to learn, continue to invest in yourself, continue to stay hungry. And we've got a bright future. We just have to keep pushing.
Here we go. There you have it. Thanks so much for joining. We'll see you next Tuesday, 1 p.m. With Dan to talk about cloud agnosticism. And keep up the good fight. And let's make sure our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Cheers.